Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm so excited to share this week's episode with my dear friend Yatsen. Now, when we first met, he was my client, and in between all our classes, we would have these really interesting bite sized conversations, good laughter about our heritage quirks, our family lives, and business, and much, much more. Now, Yatsen, like me, he also up and left Curaçao, but he went to live in China. And I wanted to know what was life like through his lens, learning from another culture. And as always, he's full of surprises, and he surprised me on sharing about his variety of cultures within him and how that has influenced and shaped his life and his experiences. Now, this is unusual. I know you're usually getting a video to go with this, but Yatsen's a very private person and requested to have this done in audio. So grab your hot drink or get ready to go on that walk, put those headphones on, and enjoy this week's episode. My starting sign that it was time to check out and leave Curacao. I remember you walked into the center and you were like, I am selling my yoga mat, Kirti. And this is going to be my last class. And I went, where are you going? And you were like, blank canvas. I mean, take me back to that moment. You decided to just
Yeah.
up and go.
Well, the catalyst was really. It's funny in life, how some things can be it's so scary because the catalyst was the fire. There were five big fires in the free
Oh,
zone
yeah.
where both, which is how we know each other. Our families
Yeah.
have been friendly
Our
because of the free zone and that whole business and that whole community. And those fires happen, and I didn't lose anything physically because it wasn't our building that was hit, but overnight I lost all my clients. I lost 42 clients overnight, and there's no doubt in my mind that that was arson. There have been many investigations from the Netherlands, from the States. All were inconclusive. None have been able to point to any person or organization or thing, but it was what it was. And I was at a point where I had lost everything, and I thought, what now? What now? And I don't remember I guess I read it somewhere where you have to flip that question of what now to so what? And what
Oh,
if?
wow. Really?
Yeah. And I thought, well, what I really wanted to do all these years. The thing is, I didn't really particularly love the job that I had. It was what I liked was the lifestyle it provided me, to tell you the truth. But
Maybe
it
I
was,
should just tell, and maybe I should tell the audience what we were doing. So
yes,
we were running
yeah,
a family. You had a family business as I did. Well,
yes,
family business in the free zone, which means we were doing import export, but you were doing distribution.
exactly,
And
exactly,
there
exactly.
were five
And
giganormous fires. One of was the biggest one was my dad's company actually,
that's right,
and that
that's right.
was like the final. It was really the final
Strong,
straw. Even for my dad, it
yes,
was. I think he really went into a big dip afterwards, and
yes,
it was just a lot. And
yeah,
so that is the perspective. Now going back to the so what moment. So you said 42 clients gone.
yeah. And I had a business. It was a subsidiary of my father's business, and he was not ready to leave. He was like, we've been through tougher times before. We can survive this. And I was, of course, it was a generational gap as well in thinking. He was more like holding on, kind of rusted into that position of where he
Yeah.
was. Very proud, of course, because self-made man should be proud. I
Yeah, and
mean,
we were
both our
living that
fathers
lifestyle.
were precisely, and both our fathers, had made and provided for their family, their
Yeah.
clan, you could say. So they were quite well known, and I was the opposite in terms of I didn't. The fewer people I knew, the better. But it was more. I was ready to be like, okay, now what? And he was like, no, we're staying firm and steering through, keeping course. And I was like, I am bouncing out. I am not going to wait for what? For what? For something to bleed to death? And I had more the perspective of, you know what? The first time I had, during my studies, I had planned, I was supposed to do my internship in China. And at
Oh,
that
really?
time, yeah,
Why
it was in
China?
the Netherlands. It was Asian Studies and Communications in the Netherlands. That was my first study that I did. At the time, we were supposed to go to China for our internship. It was the third
Yeah.
year. And my cousin, because I have family living in China, and she had good connections with through foreign affairs. And she was like, you know what, you shouldn't come because there's something mysterious going on. There's this illness and people are getting sick. Bird flu, who knew? This was in 2001, I want to say. So I was deprived, you could say, of my internship. I had to do a subsidiary internship in the Netherlands. And I couldn't
Wow.
go to China,
I had
so I was
no
kind of
idea.
pissed. Yeah, so that was my first, like, oh, I had wanted to go so bad. And then in 2006, for the prospect of maybe doing business with China in the free
Mhm.
zone, I had done a short 4 month course in China, and that really had whetted my appetite. And I thought, you know what, this is the time as any to just go to China and see what happens. And it was very scary. I mean, that last fire, that fifth fire, I was a witness to it. It was clear daylight, and I remember it.
So I'm not going to spend much time reliving that. We're going to move forward on that one
Yes, yes,
because that being as that is, but you said China, so I don't think
yeah.
everybody knows, but your mom is from
My
China?
mom's from Suriname, and she
Okay.
has a Chinese ancestry. And my parents were always both working. My grandmother came to live with us when I think when I was born, because I don't not remember my grandmother and my mom's sister living with us. It was from the beginning. I remember them, and they're really the ones who brought me up. So that Chinese way of thinking, not so much very consciously. It's only later in life that you grow up and you think, oh, that was actually very special, and it was quite unique to have had that upbringing from my Chinese grandmother and that culture. And of course, that comes with food and with language and expressions and little words and uh, dress and clothing and how you present yourself in the world. Speaking of Asian heritage and celebration of that in the Caribbean, as a child, I do remember at school, uh, I wasn't really aware of, what my parents did for work and whatnot. But
Mm.
I remember an older kid. I was waiting after school for my mom to pick me up, and the next day, this older kid said to me, is Mrs. Wong your mother?" And I was like, "No." And I was like, "Who's Mrs. Wong? I don't know Mrs. Wong." Little did I know, my mom, who was a teacher, used her maiden name. So, but I didn't
Oh,
know
you're
her maiden name.
kidding.
So I get out of the car and I go, "That girl, she asked me if I'm Mrs. Wong's son, and she keeps telling me that I am, and and that you are Mrs. Wong." And she's like, "Yeah, because I am." I'm like, "But that's a Chinese name." It's so funny.
You're
I
kidding.
remember.
So you had
And you're
so
like,
you weren't really
newsflash.
aware that
Not
you were
that my parents were different. Nah, yeah, your dad it looks
but
like
it's
this, your mom
Curacao.
looks like that. But exactly, and it's other people who sometimes tell you who you are. And I remember it was the neighbor's gardener also, who I was also a kid, and my dad comes home for lunch, and the gardener calls him. He's like, "Shh," and very surreptitiously. He's like, "What are you doing here?" And my dad goes, "I live here." "What? You know these Asian people? What do you know about them?"
You're kidding.
And he's like, "Well, I'm the head of the family." Like, what?
So your dad is from Curacao, or is he
Yes,
from
my dad's
elsewhere
from
as well?
Curacao. His mom's from Willie Broadus, and his dad had family in Bonaire. So he's a Curacao guy, Caribbean, born and raised, Afro-Caribbean. And it was only later that I started to appreciate, because the funny thing is, I also grew up with always going to New York and being in New York a lot, because my half
Really?
brother and sister on my father's side, they
Hmm.
upgraded when I was really young with their mom. So my stepmom, I always called her my stepmom. They moved to New York, and but they are, New Yorican in the sense that they're half Dominican. Their mom was Dominican, my stepmom, and so growing up, I would always spend summers there, and so home is always Curacao, Suriname, New York, a little bit of the Netherlands now, because now I've been living here for 8 years. Asia, particularly
So
China, because
what
I
do
lived there for 7 years.
so do you get what I get? I mean, my family were international, but not as international as
Exactly.
yours, which is married into the family. So I always get this question: where are you from?
Where are
That's
you
one.
from?
And the second one is, where is home? And I just, these two
Right,
questions, I find
exactly.
like, how many hours do you want to have a conversation about? What are your
Exactly.
answers to this?
For me, it's always, if you can be everywhere and anywhere and nowhere and be still be you, that's freedom. That's You're free
Yeah.
when you belong to no place and every place. And sometimes the price is high, but the rewards are great. You belong to yourself. That's
Did you get to that, or were you always at that thinking?
Oh, no, no, no. I got to that. Long live getting older. As a child,
Okay,
all you want to do is.
so tell me one thing, because you experienced, I would say you experienced the trauma in Curacao, right?
Oh, yes.
From
Oh,
seeing those fires. And because I had no idea you were so up close to it. And then you go off to China. Is that the starting point of who am I in your belonging, or did it
no,
start way before that?
that did start before. That started, I would say, in my teens, because the whole teenage angst. That I would say the trauma in Curacao of high school was bigger than the trauma of the fires.
Really?
Oh, yes, yes. I did not go to international school. I went to very local school.
Mhm.
My mom very consciously. My dad always wanted me to go to international school, and my mom was always very adamant, even though she's not from there. She was always, and as a teacher, so I get it. She was always like, "No, my kid is going to learn the same thing as everybody else. He's not going to think he's
Yeah.
better than anybody else, and anything that I want to bring extra in my upbringing, I'm going to do that at home as an educator." Which is a
Okay.
good way to think.
Yeah.
If you have those tools as an educator, then sure. But of course, also Tiger Mom Asian upbringing, which meant, I come home, I do my homework, and it's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, you're done with your homework? Here's more." But this is not what the teacher said I should, and then you get a look, and it's like, "Oh, all right." I'm not gonna protest, teacher mom.
Damn.
So there was very much that, no sweets during the week, no, yeah, that was
So
my
where was the
white.
trauma in all this from school, being in the
Trauma in
public school?
school was really public school, and mostly high school, but also before that, just being a gay man in growing up in Curacao in the 80s, early early
Oh,
80s, was not an easy. And in my head, I was hiding it. when you're when you're a child, when you're a gay child, you don't know the definition of it, because of course, as a child, it has nothing to do with sexuality. It's your
yeah.
identity. But there's something quote unquote wrong with you. All you know is you have a secret. And whatever this is, you have to do your best to keep it secret, because it's not what other kids in the street are projecting onto you as being normal and good. And so you associate normal with being good and being like everybody else as being good, and anything that deviates as being wicked. So that was the biggest trauma, I would say, from Curacao.
So were you
And
bullied for it?
oh yes, 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 very, very much, very much. If it wasn't, you know, there were a few times I would be bullied for race when they saw my mom, like, oh, your mom's like this, I'm making the movement where I'm pulling the corners of my eyes backward, and they're like, oh, Chino, your mom's Chino like this, and the teeth like that.
Oh, I remember
I'd
those
had those
moments.
a couple of times, not many,
Yeah.
but it has happened. Yeah, yeah, where you're, being, and that's any kid really could have goes through being made the other. But so there were those moments, and there was, yeah, the gay thing.
Do you know it's really bad of me? I took that for granted. I forgot I forgot that we grew up in that age period where it wasn't normal, because now
Right.
when to me I don't see, it's not that I don't see. It's like, okay,
No, but
that's their
it's not a
preference. But
problem.
back then it was a problem. It was a big
Yes,
problem back then.
back then it was a problem, and I'm very happy that at home I was always safe. At home, home was a sanctuary, and having a lot of women in my life, my mom, my grandmother, my mom's sister, uh, in the household, that was a big uh, um, that was a good thing.
But even with Asian heritage, they very accepting of it? That you when you came when
My
you or did they
mom
know?
was. My grandmother, I could have flaunted in a dress in front of her in high heels, and the thought would not have occurred to her, perhaps, even though
Yeah.
she had a gay brother.
Okay.
It's not something that was important to her. She was very religious, but it was not something that was ever a problem. But it's also at the same time was not something that was necessarily talked about or acknowledged. Whereas my mom always made it a point to, you know, buy me dolls when I wanted, and at home it was just not a problem at all. It was not an
Uh,
issue. Sure, my dad had trouble with it when I was younger, but later on, I mean, now he's crazy about my partner. He's crazy about me, of course. So it's not an issue at all. And then he's completely accepting of it. But wasn't always. In the beginning, it was a bit troublesome.
So when you went to, because maybe I've got a bias, or I have an ignorance. I would say I have an ignorance because I don't know what it's
Mm.
like. So when a bias would be me having this assumption that Asian culture is also not very accepting of the LGBTQ plus community. In South Asia, I know there's still taboos around it,
Hmm.
or
Yeah,
they're bringing out a lot more movies about it, but still it does create a bit of a wave. So going to China, was that the same or
it
acceptable?
was never. It was not necessarily an issue, I would say. I mean, I lived there for 7 years in the early early noughts, 1999 to the early noughts. It was never really a problem for me per se. I mean, I would run into funny situations, laughable or so idiotic that you just laugh it off.
Like,
Um, I had one guy ask me who was interested in me, but at the same time,
yeah.
he was very trepidatious. And he's like, do you have AIDS? I was like, what? He's like, yeah, because black people, y'all bring AIDS to China.
Get out of town. Seriously?
Yes, 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 yes. So on one hand, he's very curious and he wants to, pursue something, but then he's also very afraid, like, oh my God, if I'm even gonna try to become close to this person, I'm gonna get AIDS because it's the blacks, because it's the propaganda. It's not from China. It's outsiders who bring it in, namely Africans. So there's a lot of misinformation, miseducation, and I always feel like it's not my place to have to. I mean, you pick your battles. And in terms of at that time, there were gay bars. There still are. How gay bars work in China usually is even back in my day, I would say there were even strippers at these bars, go-go boys, whatnot. And as long as you, as an owner of this venue, are able to pay off and buy off government officials, you can get away with having go-go dancers in your venue.
So
So there
otherwise,
was
that's
a
illegal?
party. Otherwise, it's not. And homosexuality is no longer illegal in China since I think
Okay.
late 70s, 78.
Uh-huh.
So it's not considered a mental health illness. It's certainly frowned upon. I often would say, because of course I knew many other expats who also had a local Chinese boyfriend. You can have a long, loving relationship with a gay relationship with a Chinese man, but in the end, he's gonna leave you to marry a woman because filial piety and that deep crusted culture of having to please the parents, that
Yeah.
hierarchy, of putting your parents' happiness before yours, that is so deeply ingrained into the culture. So there was a
Still is,
point,
you know?
very much, very much. But nowadays there are, a lot of websites, dating sites where gays and lesbians can congregate and quote unquote make arrangements with each other to marry. In some cases, even through insemination or sometimes naturally, that's their business, create a family just for face value and, making the parents happy. Imagine I would have a lesbian friend, or not even a friend. I would meet this woman on a gay dating site. We would become friends, have an arrangement. Oftentimes it's very transactional. Oftentimes there's money involved. You marry each other. You put all your things in order, and you make a family just for the family, purely for the outward world and the outside world, thinking, oh, you're a happily married man and woman, you have a kid. Because it's, in the end, it's not about being happy.
Did that
It's, in the end,
surprise
it's about,
you?
no, no. Knowing the culture, quite common now. It's even so common now in China where people, even straight men and women who are only friends, will marry just to have their parents get off their backs, just for that outside. And also, in an economy where there's so much joblessness, the economy is really suffering. So there's really an economic malaise going on. So, procreation is not on the top of most people's list, even though
Mhm.
they do feel that obligation to have a family. But they put it off to later age because they're too young. They want to make a living for themselves first. All these Western values that are seeping into culture, what much more than Southeast culture, where there has always been, because of colonialism, always been this intertwining of certain values, or
Mhm.
more acceptance of Western values where it works, or because of pragmatism, and call it colonialism, what you will, but it works and people know it. It's not something new. Whereas in China, these new values are quite new in many, many ways. It's not necessarily, and in big cities, fine, but, in some
But
little
smaller
village,
places not. Yeah.
yes, exactly,
I
exactly.
would still, I would say probably, if I'm hearing correctly, the traditions are still pretty tight.
Yes, yes. The traditions are,
Is the
and
Yeah.
pardon to, I equate it to Italy 150 years ago. Italy 150 years ago was not one country. It was these
States?
different states and with their own
Yeah.
cultures and subcultures. And China's just like this. It's one country now with one government, but it has for a very, very long time not been one country. It's all these different counties. And I mean, it's immense. And each county and region has its own culture, its own language, just like India.
Yeah.
Their own, the Southern culture is completely different from Northern culture. Same in China.
Mhm.
Food, culture is completely different in South and North. Same in China.
It's like India.
Also West. Yeah, yeah, precisely. So, and people in the West think, oh, it's one country, one culture, one. Sure, government is on one level, but everything that trickles down from that is very uh, dissimilar. And that's the beauty of it. That's the richness of it. That's also the difficulty to govern so many different points of view and backgrounds and histories. But that is the melee and the melting pot that are these countries.
I like the fact that you're sharing this with me. And I know there's a lot of people like me who always think about China as like a one size fits all. Just because of the government that you think it's a
Yeah.
one size fits all. But actually what you're saying is no, it's very different inside as well. And still tied with like, you're still able to go to cities, you're still able to be and express yourself, but you're very aware that the culture had not really evolved and still very face value.
The only qualms I have are with the government and the human rights. And I'm very, I would not, I would never romanticize those issues. But just living there has always been wonderful. And the funny thing is, I've made friends there that of course, I've made friends here in the Netherlands as well. You make friends everywhere you go, but I always say the friends I made there, the profound relationships I've cultivated there. If something were to happen, let's say war were to break out in this
Yeah.
country, in the
You could
Netherlands,
depend on them.
I with the friends I have here, the local friends, I'm not sure I would be able to. Whereas if it was in China, I know that if the S hits the fan, I would be able to depend on them
Is
completely.
that culture? The way
Yes,
they were raised?
yes, yes. I think that is culture because I've made friends from north and south and different corners of the country, and
Mm.
yeah, they're still very, very much very close to my heart, and vice versa. And
So wherever you were in the world, was that the closest you came to home?
more than in this country, I would say. And it's similar. I had something similar in Suriname. I haven't been to Suriname very often. In
Hmm.
fact, I always joke that I've had four funerals and a wedding, which is actually true.
Okay.
I've had four funerals and a wedding in Suriname. And of course, the circumstances are very special, whether it's a funeral or a wedding. But the bonds and the ties that I've made when I was there under those circumstances. And it's not because it was those circumstances, because every time I was there, I would meet new family. And it was like coming home, even though I didn't know some of them. And it was like, oh, they talk like me. Oh, they think like me, and it was really a homecoming. Whereas in Curacao, even though my place of birth and I love it, and I I do have very, very
Yeah.
deep
Good friends.
connections and good friends. Yeah, it's funny. Uh, I can't say I've had that with local friends here, but that may be it may be on me as well.
No, I understand because I have this, I'm undergoing this phase right now where I'm like, do I want to stay in the UK or not? Because I don't feel like I belong here at all. I'm always talking and people
Mhm.
go, are you American? And I'm like, no. And I'm like, I'm tired of this conversation. And then you
Conversation,
go,
yes, trying to
you
explain.
know, and then you go to Curacao and you're reminded why you left in the first place. I mean, I like you, I have deep
Yes.
connections and great. I can be there for a week or two, but on the third week, I'm quite antsy
Yeah.
to leave.
And you
And
remind, yes.
and then when you get to Netherlands, which I have been, and I have again deep connections and everything. But I know I couldn't stay, I couldn't live there. So I'm just left wondering.
Yeah,
I'm always asking
yeah.
myself, okay, where am I? Where am I going to end up? I'm always curious. where I'm going to end
Yes.
up because I'm like, is this London? Is this it?
Right,
So
right. And those are the good questions to remind ourselves, because it helps me to do a little evaluation of, is this good? Is this right? Me and my partner recently we had a registered partnership very recently, so that's also an
that was a big
affirmament
deal
of
for you,
something.
right?
That was a very big deal. Um, First of all, because I have always because it's a very not new relationship. It's we've been together for 8 years now. But
Yeah.
before that, I'm 48, so for 40 years I was pretty much single and alone, but never lonely. In fact, I always made it a point to practice loneliness, which is maybe the wrong word, not loneliness, but
Practice
I
aloneness, I would say, because that's what I
exactly,
think. I think
exactly.
that's what
Yes,
you and I always bind and agree on. Like, it's a good
yes,
practice to have.
yes, yes. I always say solitude. I am the least alone in solitude. But also in a relationship and putting a ring on it, literally, it was no less freeing. In fact, it was very freeing. It's an anchor in the
Really?
middle of my life that always pulls me back to the center where I need it. We chose a civil union, um, and I always felt like, not always, but for the longest time, I felt like I don't want these heteronormative norms imposed on us. This is why do we have to do these heteronormative things to be able to, because what it boils down to, if anything happens to him, if we did not have a civil union, I wouldn't be able to visit him in the hospital and vice versa. And we
Really?
wouldn't be able to, yeah, yeah. In fact, I've heard of cases, even in this country, where a gay couple had a surrogate and there was an issue with a child at a hospital, and the gay parents, one of them was not allowed because they were not the biological one, and the surrogate was allowed because she was the biological mother. And, I just, not
It
that
was
I
messy
am, it can get very messy, and I have
and
no
very
desire to bring.
very emotionally traumatizing if you can't see your partner.
Oh my goodness, yes. And we both don't have family in this country. So in terms of direct, my siblings are
Mhm.
in New York. His family is from Germany. His sister's in Germany. His parents are in Germany. If anything happens, we have to be able to pull that plug. And you could leave that task to your family, but your family is not going to do it. It's too close. It's too emotional. They won't be able to. Some, not all,
Well,
but
I'm single, so if anything happens to me, I pity my three sisters because they'd have to make a lot of decisions that I wouldn't want to make, and vice versa.
right. Yes,
But
yes,
I
yes,
had no idea. So
yeah,
you aren't a
yeah.
registered. You surprised me today because I know we spoke about this before I hit record. That
Hmm.
you are not in a marriage, but you are in a registered partnership,
Yes, it's civil
and
union.
a civil union. And that was the first time I've ever heard it, and I like the idea of it. Actually, I think it's
Mm,
neutral, free from religion in many ways,
precisely. Exactly. Exactly.
and it belongs to everybody. It doesn't just belong to
Exactly.
man and
Precisely.
wife.
A
But
niche
I
or yes.
but now listening to your story and what you went through in China, right? On
Hmm.
face
Hmm.
value or understanding the face value of it.
Yes.
Was that the reason why you were resistant or you don't like the traditional version of marriage of a wedding?
I mean, I could psychoanalyze myself and say, it's because my parents are divorced. I'm from a broken family and all these things. Even
Hmm.
though that's all true, but on the same token, I'm also very grateful. I think it was just before COVID, I went to New York to say farewell to my stepmother. She was in hospice,
Oh,
and I remember thanking her. She remembered me, which I didn't, which took me by surprise, because she was in and out. I said thank you because if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have grown up with this extra family that I had. My parents, my family, my dad had a family before he met my mom, had kids. They moved to New York, but they always felt it was important for me to, even though the parents were, no longer married, that the
Yeah.
children should not suffer under that. The children should always keep and maintain a relationship with each other. And because of that, I learned how to speak Spanish from a very early age because my stepmother was Dominican, so she spoke Spanish with my brother and
Mm.
sister. And moving to New York, they were bilingual, so it was English and Spanish. But for me, it was the sixth language because Surinamese, Dutch, Chinese, English, all these languages I bring to New York in that upbringing. So this was all very enriching. And of course, as a kid, you don't really know how to, it was my birthday in summer, and all I want is, a big party with lots of gifts. And it's like, what are you talking about? You're going to New York. How many kids can't go to New York? You go to New York. That's your gift. That's your birthday gift. Take it. And it's like, what? But I want a party and I want gifts. What are you talking about? Do you know how much money this ticket costs? That's your gift. But of course, and then you grow up and you're just grateful for that part of your life and for having this extended family by default. You didn't ask for it, but they're there. That's beautiful.
It
And
is very beautiful. So when you share about that, it is possible. It's about this. It's really I don't know if it's an Asian thing, but it's the art of loving kindness to some degree. This idea of family first.
family, yes, do no harm. And also maybe the fact that, I mean, both Asian culture and in Dominican culture, the boy, is very important. So I
Also,
wasn't very. What's that?
in the Dominican
Have you,
Dominican
also,
culture
yes,
as well.
yes, yes.
Wow.
If I look at my brother and sister, my sister she's the oldest,
Yeah.
and when they were little, my brother didn't have to lift a finger, where she had to learn to cook and clean and look after him and look after her mother, look after everybody, and that was expected. And also Curacao culture. My dad's a true-blooded, blue-blooded Curacao man, and my grandmother really frowned upon the fact that my mom made me clean my room. I mean, we grew up very similarly in the sense that we have help in the house, we have help in the garden, we have
Mhm.
workers in the garden, and we had workers in the house, and it was normal. But my room, my mom always said, just because we have help doesn't mean that she's going to do everything for you. Your room has to be spick and span, and you have to look after it. That's
No
your
one,
responsibility.
no wonder your father and my father were friends because my mom and my dad. I still remember when we needed we were getting a computer had come out, for example,
Yeah.
and he told my mom, he's like, the girls have to work for it. And we were like, what? Everybody else is getting one. He's like, nah, you girls got to work for it. And I was like, that's just not fair.
No.
But now when I look back on it, I go, well, I'm grateful that nothing was just given to us right away. It
Right.
wasn't like,
Right.
there you go, get it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I did like a bit of that, harsh, not what they would consider like harshness today. I
Right.
like the strictness. I
Yes.
did now I
Boundaries.
can say it. Yeah,
Yes.
the
Yes.
boundaries.
Yes. And
Um,
kids want boundaries. They don't know it, but they want boundaries.
um, yeah, yes, and this is where when somebody will go, "Are you both parents?" And we'll be like, "No."
Exactly. Exactly. I was just thinking, even though you and I can't.
No, I was a yoga teacher, and there were a lot of comments after
There was,
the kid was
yeah.
left. It's like, did your mom
Right.
come and pick you up? And was being naughty. Um, but the moms would tell me, they're like, my child needs boundaries. I'm like, didn't come out of my mouth.
Exactly. And it's not my job to raise your kids.
Well, you can't say those things. You just have to smile and put the diplomatic
Right,
smile on it and go, I'm there for you.
right, and implement it anyway.
But yeah, and I have to. I'm gonna hold it till here. But I'm
All
I'm
right.
getting you back because there's always so much. I haven't even spoken to you about your journey with acupuncture, which is one that I will come back to. But thank you for giving me
Much
your
obliged.
time.
Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Hey, so that's a wrap. If you haven't yet, do hit follow or subscribe to this channel. And also, you can look me up at Kirtana168. I do have an email list on Substack, and it'd be lovely for you to join me there as I'm building a community and sharing my insights and articles and much, much more on that platform. Hey, have a wonderful week ahead, and till the next episode, take care.